To sum up this podcast in one simple statement, what couldn't Cecilia Stein do? She could do basically anything and everything according to her. And more specifically, I'm referring to occult abilities or supernatural abilities or whatever you would like to label it off to. I'm not referring to her so-called degrees and educational skills and so on. These are the supernatural, the occult, the weird and bizarre things that she claimed that she could do. As a whole, Cecilia Stein claimed to be the most powerful witch in the world. So powerful that she had been challenged apparently by numerous witches, strong witches, from across the globe, and they all horribly failed. And according to her, when those witches failed, they were killed, because it was basically a duel to the death. One had to die in order basically to prove that the other was the strongest or stronger than the one challenging. And Cecilia also further claimed that she was continuously challenged throughout her life by numerous witches throughout the world, because she was the envy of all these witches, because they wanted to be more powerful, they wanted to be the strongest, and so on. And also, according to Cecilia, if you could defeat another witch, basically end up killing her in the challenge, you would then inherit that witch's supernatural abilities or occult abilities. So with every challenge that she was met with, apparently, she would then inherit even more powers, more abilities. So, again, what was there that Cecilia Stein couldn't do, according to her? I'm going to talk about 10 main abilities or powers that Cecilia Stein claimed to have. These were common. These were almost an everyday scenario or everyday talk when it came to Cecilia. 4 of these abilities I had witnessed personally, although question marks honestly still do run through my mind about the numerous scenarios I encountered through each one of them. And then there is one ability that I had not personally experienced, but several other people who had known Cecilia had apparently experienced it for themselves. And as for the other 5 claimed abilities, they were faked, or just simple claims, basically. So the first one that I'll mention is being able to turn into a wolf or a werewolf, whether it be full moon, a high occult night, whether Cecilia Stein's protein levels had dropped too low, or by turning into a werewolf by force, by her own control. This was it was her main, most, and common every single day claim. It was basically the core of Cecilia. She had a werewolf bloodline. But through the scenarios that I previously mentioned in my other podcasts, they were confusing in those scenarios that I had witnessed. They were pretty, or at the very least, convincing. Then there were other people who claimed to have seen even more evidence, but no actual full transformation for that matter. But at the end of the day, Cecilia Stein still just faked turning into a werewolf, using fake fangs and whatever other methods she deemed were useful. But I've already spoken about this more extensively in one of my previous audios. But as for the werewolf claim, the werewolf bloodline, I basically simply deem myself as being fooled into believing them. This I don't count as a first-hand scenario or piece of evidence that genuinely actually happened. It was just something I was fooled into, along with many others. The second common ability that Cecilia Stein had was astral projection. Now, I've spoken quite extensively on this topic, and this I would say would be a first hand and a very regular experience with Cecilia. In all honesty, I do think that she could astral project because there were too many incidences that you just could not sway off. I mean, if someone else had told me about Cecilia astraling to them and whatever happened, I could have just swayed it off as nonsense. But I had experienced far too many astral projection encounters with Cecilia Stein for myself since the beginning for almost 4 years to sway this off as nonsense. For me personally, I think this is one thing that she could actually do. But in addition to the astral projection, there are certain claims that Cecilia had, or certain things that Cecilia said, that I would sway off as nonsense. Things that I don't think she had experienced, things that I don't think she had done. For example, one of the regular things she would tell me and others in her group is that she had often astral projected to the moon, and she would then talk about what it would look like while sitting on the moon, staring at the other planets and at the Earth. She would talk quite extensively about the whole scenario, the whole event. Honestly, I don't think she ever did that. But I think taking into account with my own encounters with astral projection from Cecilia, and all those in Cecilia's group also haven't experienced the same. Even though astraling to the moon sounds far-fetched, I guess at the end of the day, we basically put it on top of the pile of, well, it could have been a possibility. It's not something we've experienced, but this whole scenario and everything revolving around Cecilia Stein was very new to every single one of us. So, since we had experienced, for each of us, firsthand, countless scenarios with Cecilia Stein with her astral projection, her claims for astraling to the moon, well, they were not really that important to be true or not. It was fascinating. In honesty, it would actually be quite cool, but it was not something that was critical in order to be true. But we were easily swayed into believing that she did astral to the moon because we had no reason to doubt. I mean, after countless, and I mean countless, extensive and detailed experiences with Cecilia astraling for each and every single one of us, we had no reason to doubt her. But also, in addition to Cecilia's claims for astral projection, she claimed that other occult members had managed to astral project into her husband's body, but also into Cecilia Stein's body herself. And while the other person was inside either Cecilia Stein's body or her husband's body, they would then take full control of that person's body to do whatever. And the person who owns that body basically would be rendered useless, helpless. They would not be able to control what they were doing. They were completely aware of what was going on, but they could not control their actions, whether it was physical actions or verbal actions. Someone else was doing it. It was not them, because someone from the occult had astral projected into their body. Cecilia Stein had also claimed that she had done the same to one of the other occult members in order to punish her. As far as memory serves, Cecilia had claimed to have astral projected into Lizette's body, and I've spoken about Lisette in one of my audios quite a while ago, but In all honesty, I don't think this scenario ever happened with Cecilia astraling into Lizette's body, but I wasn't there for it. I do not know if it is possible to do that. And Cecilia's explanations and reasonings for how it happens and why it happens, and the supposed fact that it did happen, um, well, she was the expert basically at the end of the day when it came to astral projection. We weren't even on the amateur level in knowing anything about astral projection. All we knew was what we had continuously experienced with Cecilia. So, with her claims of someone astraling into her body or her being able to do it into someone else's body, I think, in all honesty, that was quite a scary thought. I mean, the thought of someone else taking over your body while you're fully aware of what they're doing, and whatever was being done would always be completely disastrous. But you had no control at the end of the day, and then you were basically blamed for whatever the other person had done while they had taken over your body. So, as a whole, for the astral projection topic, I do believe Cecilia Stein knows how to astral project, but for the extensive additions of information on the events, such as going to the moon or taking over someone else's body, that I think was exaggerated. I had never experienced that. So I think, for me personally, I believe that is complete nonsense. But for the rest of everything astral related, I had witnessed it too many times to swear it off as it being a fake claim. It was something I could not possibly deny. It was too common. The events were too unexplainable. And it was dumbfounding at the very least. But this is one thing that everyone in Cecilia's group knew solidly, that Cecilia Stein knew. She knew how to astral project. There was no question about it, and I'm sure if I had to ask everyone who had ever known Cecilia if they believed she could astral project, they would more than likely say yes, because simply of all these experiences. It was just, there were too many, like I said, and there was no way you could explain them away. Now, the third common trait or common ability that Cecilia claimed to have was basically reading people's minds. For myself, I had witnessed this from day one of meeting Cecilia. I had spoken about this as well in my previous audios. Cecilia Stein knew stuff about me that I had never told anyone, and this continued throughout the course of our friendship. She just knew. She knew the events that happened long into my past, as well as events that happened the previous day, the events that happened just before I arrived at her flat. She even knew my likes and my dislikes on the simplest of things. It was very, very strange. There is no way I could actually, in all honesty, explain my personal experiences. There's no way I could explain them away, because I tested her as well when it came to her just knowing things. How could she possibly just know when no one else knew? It's easy if someone else had related a scenario where Cecilia Stein claimed to know something about them. But when it came to me personally, and even personally testing Cecilia, I was dumbstruck. She just knew things. It actually eventually boiled down to the point that you felt completely exposed. Even though, for me, I had nothing, in all honesty, to hide ever, but I had never felt so transparent in my entire life. Someone who knew my entire history without me saying a single word. Someone who knew my likes and my dislikes. Someone who knew basically everything. It was weird. It was, I can't explain it. I've never felt so transparent. And there is no way I could possibly ever explain this claimed ability away from Cecilia because, like I said, I had tested her and I had witnessed it through the course of our friendship. It was just, and I've honestly tried to explain this away because how on earth can someone else read your mind? But she could. And look, in all honesty, I've heard about it a lot in the media for years. But to witness it with someone firsthand, to meet someone in person who could actually do this and do it so often, there is no ways I could explain this away. But at the same time, there is a very strong, striking question. If Cecilia Stein knew, or she could read your mind, then how did she not expect or suspect me questioning her, or any of the other members of her group, like Ria, for example, for when we were starting to pick up on her lies, for when we were considering leaving? How did she just suddenly not know? In the beginning, and for the course of the most of the time period that we knew her, she could read our minds as clear as day, but then suddenly she could not. That to me doesn't make sense. Why couldn't she suddenly not, why couldn't she pick up on the question marks that are running through your mind, or even the warnings that people started eventually giving me and other members of Cecilia's group? How did she suddenly just not know? So when it comes to Cecilia Stein being able to read your mind, to a vast extent, I do believe she could do this, because there is no ways I could explain it away. But I do have a lot of question marks hanging over this topic as well. But also, going back to the previous ability with astral projection, the same question also poses in my mind, and it has for a number of years. Since I left Cecilia Stein in 2010, why could she not find me for all these years? If she could astral to wherever I was at any given time period through the course of our friendship, and after I had left her group, she was looking to kill me, how could she suddenly just not find me? And she would then ultimately resort to sending random text messages every single year and a couple of times each year in order to try find where I was located. How could she just not simply astral like she had always done before? So, to an extent there as well, I do have question marks. Now, the fourth claimed ability is not one that I have personally experienced, but it was a common, or a fairly common topic. Cecilia had shown members of her group photos of her levitating. These photos were actually taken from the movie The Craft, but the images that were shown to us were basically small enough and blurry enough for us to not be able to identify if that was Cecilia Stein in the actual image itself. And before showing any of us these images, Cecilia already knew if we had or hadn't seen that movie. She would already suss out each person in depth enough in order to figure out if we would be able to identify this movie or not. And if it was clear to her that we wouldn't have a clue that it was from a movie, then we were showing the photo. I mean, I remember Cecilia had shown us numerous photos, and I had asked her on several occasions why the person in the photo doesn't really look like her. And she would simply and casually explain away that this was in her much younger years, and she would go through different phases where she would dye her hair different colors, have different hairstyles, different dress sense, and so on. All very valid points because some people do change dramatically over the years with the way they age, and a lot of people do go through phases with hairstyles and hair colors. But there were certain images that I had honestly analyzed extensively, and I still could not make heads or tails of how this person could actually look like Cecilia Stein in any of her younger years, no matter which phase or which whatever she was doing at that point in her life. It just did not look like her, and it did not look like it could possibly be her. But again, the photo was small enough and blurry enough, so I would ultimately just resort to keeping quiet because, I mean, if you're continuously given the same explanation, simple and casually explained, there was basically no point in trying to argue the point because you had no proof to back up your own reasoning. And it was not a critical point, really, in trying to prove or disprove that it was Cecilia in the photo itself. Because also, even in the photos were in angles in such a way that you could not see the face of the person that accurately as well. So it became fairly complex in order to try and argue this point. And also with Cecilia Stein, to argue with her is just quite something you do not want to do. She was just far too beyond brilliantly manipulative and too brilliant at acting innocent. And also, if all else fails, she would break you into not believing her, like as if you were betraying her when she was trusting you with her life, basically. And here you are questioning her on the simplest and tiniest of details. Meantime, her life is hanging in the balance of life and death. So, which is more important, basically, at the end of the day? Trying to save her life, or arguing over a photo that is blurry from a strange angle from her much younger years? To an extent, it was a valid point. Why argue over a photo when there are more things that are more critical at hand, trying to save someone's life, rather than arguing over the fact of whether the photo is true or not? But what I wanted to say with levitation, I had never once personally encountered Cecilia Stein in person levitating. So even after I had left Cecilia Stein, I threw this whole ability claim out the window as complete nonsense. Until the years went by, and even after the trial and the sentencing had taken place, I then encountered other people who had known Cecilia Stein, even in her younger years. There were numerous people, actually, that I had spoken to, and in all honesty, this has got my mind in quite a bit of a spin, because each of these people, as far as I know, don't know each other. And they knew Cecilia in different phases or parts of her life. And each of these people claimed to have seen Cecilia Stein actually levitate. There were several of these people who had claimed to have walked into Cecilia's room without Cecilia knowing, and as they walked into her room, they saw her levitating, and they completely freaked out at what they were seeing. But they could not deny at all that she was levitating off of her bed. So, for me, when it comes to the levitating ability that Cecilia claimed to have, the only experience I had was being shown photos from a movie, but from hearing numerous people saying that they personally witnessed it, I honestly don't know whether to believe it or not. Because why would these people lie? But why would they also not lie? There's a lot of question marks about this. And I do not want to reveal who these people are because it's also not important. But just on the notion that what if at least one of these people had actually encountered Cecilia Steyn actually levitating, it blows my mind. Not in a good way, should I say. It leaves me dumbstruck and dumbfounded, and also questioning, more so to the extent of how far or how deeply was Cecilia involved when it came to satanic practices or the occult. What was there that she could do in reality, not just claim to do? But now, the fifth ability that Cecilia claimed was one that I had witnessed, but at the same time, I'm also not quite sure if I still believe it, because I could still try reason it away. Basically, Cecilia Steyn claimed that she could move things without touching them. But basically, she could affect objects when she was quite a fair distance away from them. Now, there were several scenarios like this, and in all honesty, each one of those scenarios I could still reason down to perhaps, there was an electrical problem, perhaps a faulty battery or a faulty device, simple explanations like that. But there is one scenario that I will relate just as an example. Now, Cecilia's little daughter had one of those toy babies that each time you pressed on its stomach, it would make this very loud laughter or this very loud cry. I had actually personally bought little Louisa this doll, and I knew how hard you actually had to press this baby's stomach in order to get it to make a sound. And there was a few days after little Louisa received this doll, where this doll was lying at the far end of Cecilia's room, just on the cabinet table or ledge or whatever you would like to call it, or cabinet shelf. Little Louisa was somewhere else in the flat with her brother, and it was just Cecilia and I in her bedroom. And Cecilia was sitting on her bed. So from the edge of one side of the room to the very other end of the room, there was quite an extensive distance. And it was just simply the two of us in the bedroom. And taking into account that I highly doubt Cecilia Steyn has DID, so I can't say that perhaps Cecilia Steyn's DID parts may be astraled in order to make this happen, because believe you me, I've tried to reason this away many times, and the more the years go by, the harder it actually becomes to reason away. But I can't fathom that Cecilia Steyn could affect an object. But basically what happened was, Cecilia was lying on her bed, casually talking. I don't honestly recall what we were talking about, but it was more than likely one of her abilities. Because in that moment, she wanted to demonstrate to me that she could make this baby doll cry or make a sound from where she was lying on the bed while this doll is on the shelf at the entrance to her bedroom, which was on the other end of, the other side of the room. And sure enough, it happened. This doll made a noise. And the first time it happened, my jaw dropped. I was skeptical. I wasn't sure that I was hearing this right. Immediately I thought, no, this doll must be faulty. So Cecilia said she would do it again. And again, this doll made a noise. My jaw dropped even further. The question still ran through my mind. And Cecilia could still see that I was not completely believing this, or I was just too dumbstruck. And she was, in all honesty, overly excited at being able to brag about this ability to see the response on someone else's face, especially since I'm gathering my response was quite an extreme one. I mean, imagine seeing something move or happen without someone else being there to affect it. So Cecilia did this a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, to the point where I eventually just could not explain this away. The the doll made a noise every single time Cecilia Stain said she would make the doll make a noise. And in between each time period, she would wait a couple of minutes. Sometimes the minutes would be longer than the other times, just to demonstrate to me that there was no faulty batteries. This doll was not faulty, making noises of its own, or anything of the sort. She wanted to show me that she could actually control this doll. She wanted to show me that she could make this doll make a noise whenever she wanted it to. But in all honesty, for this ability, my mind battles because of the things that I had experienced. There weren't too many of these abilities specifically for this topic that I had firsthand witnessed. But what I had witnessed was fairly extreme. So I would say I'm pretty much 50-50 on this. It could still be a faulty toy, faulty batteries, something logically that could explain it away. But then, could Cecilia Stain actually affect something without even being remotely close to it? Because, I mean, what I'd witnessed was mind-baffling. It was, I was dumbstruck. I will never forget that day, that moment. It was, my mind was blown. But at the same time, I will also say that if Cecilia Stain could just control objects at any given time point if she wanted to, then why couldn't she do a lot of things for herself? For example, why couldn't she protect herself? Why couldn't, well, I suppose in the murder scenarios, why couldn't she just make objects fly across the room to kill someone else? As an example, simple examples to any extreme. When Cecilia Stain's husband's car couldn't work, why couldn't she just make it work? There's countless examples or ideas that could run through my mind that could justify Cecilia Stain not legitimately being able to control things, make things basically obey her very word or her very thought. Because I had only seen this firsthand a few times, but it doesn't explain why she could not do this in countless other scenarios for whatever other reason. And this basically spans into the sixth claimed ability, where Cecilia claimed that she could affect or harm anybody without being able to touch them. Now, in my previous audios, in one of them at least, about astraling, I had mentioned that Cecilia Stain claimed how an astral could actually kill someone, how an astral could kill a physical person or an animal. So aside from being astral related, but more based on the claim of being able to just will things to happen, for things to move, for things to take effect. She also claimed to be able to affect any person, no matter what it is. She claimed as far as being able to make someone's breathing stop, to make their chest feel tight, to break their arm, to do absolutely anything to anybody at any given point. So the sixth ability spans into being able to affect people, not just objects. But I had never seen her do this once. I have countless questions, and similar to the ones I had just mentioned as well. If she could harm a person at any given point without touching them, without even being near them, why could she not just kill a person and not have Miranda and the others being sent out to do it? If she had this ability, why not then have rather used the ability? Just thinking along Cecilia's sadistic sort of mindset here. And even when the investigators first initially came to her, when she was arrested, even during the sentencing and the trial before that, according to Cecilia, she could have made anyone and everyone in that room drop down dead just by willing it. So why didn't she? She was on trial to be sent away for life. Surely in that moment, if she had that ability, she would have done something that drastic or that extreme or even half that extreme in order to escape so that she wouldn't be sent to prison. So when it comes to this part of her claimed ability, I throw it off as complete nonsense. I've never seen her being able to harm anybody without touching them. Well, other than getting someone else physically to do it. But in the supernatural means or ability means, I've never once seen her being able to do this. And it was very, very closely tied to being able to cause objects to move and to have any effect on them. So that also, again, throws more question marks on the ability for affecting objects. And basically it throws it off more so to being complete nonsense. But my mind wages war and says, but try explain away what you witnessed. And like I've said, believe you me, I've tried. I've thought of countless things, and I'm an overthinker. I overthink my overthinking. I have mind map upon mind map. And when it comes to scenarios with Cecilia Steyn, you can only imagine the chaotic mind map and spiderweb and chaos of trying to reason out the things that I witnessed after just being something as simple as technology or a coincidence and so on. But there are things that I still can't explain away, except basically to saying that some of these things she could actually really do. Now, there was a seventh ability that Cecilia claimed to have, and that was invisibility. She claimed to be able to make herself completely invisible at any given time, and she would be visible to only those who she wanted to be visible to. Now, in all honesty, that sounds like a very dumb reasoning to explain this to someone else. Because, for example, if I'm with Cecilia and she wants me to be able to see her, and for no one else around her to see her, I'm the only one witnessing what's going on. But I'm not witnessing what's going on through other people's eyes. So this is something that I immediately thought would be impossible. Um, Basically, yeah, right. There's no way you could prove this because I can't witness what other people witness, and I can't see through another person's eyes. And I've never once seen Cecilia turn invisible myself. But there was one scenario that I do have question marks about, but at the same time, I'm still highly doubting that the whole invisibility ability uh, is true. But what I had witnessed does raise questions. Basically, the scenario happened where Cecilia was trying to hide from her parents, from her dad, her supposedly claimed stepmother, Mara, and her nephew, because she was in trouble. She wanted to hide away from them, and I don't recall which scenario was going on between the lot of them because there was seemingly endless drama, and she was always getting into trouble, and they wanted to basically have her put away, have her sent for counseling, have her sent to prison. The list was literally endless. And in this one specific scenario, Cecilia was uh, very much in trouble. Technically, she had done something where her parents wanted to have her arrested. But whenever they came by the flat, Cecilia was never there. She was conveniently never there. I hadn't been there for any of the incidences where her parents or the police had apparently pitched up to arrest Cecilia. But in the scenario that I'm going to relate, it still baffles me. Basically, Cecilia and I were across from her flat at the hospital. We had done the usual route to go and buy her medicine, her drip bags, and so on. And on the way back from the hospital, walking across the street, we see Cecilia's biological mother, Mara, and her nephew by Cecilia's front door, knocking on the front door. By the time I didn't even know how to explain this time frame because it was so quick. But basically, by the time we had seen them, we were already by the pavement, by Cecilia's front door, and they had just arrived to come and knock on Cecilia's front door. They were looking for Cecilia. But Cecilia and I were standing right in front of Mara and Cecilia's nephew, but they did not see us. We were legitimately standing probably not even 5 feet away, right in front of them. And they did look around on the outside of the flat while they were waiting for someone to answer the door. They glanced over in our direction, but it was such a quick glance as if they didn't see anybody standing there. It was as if they were staring at an empty street, at an empty pavement. They were there looking for Cecilia, but yet Cecilia and I were merely 5 meters away from the two of them. Immediately then, Cecilia rushed me to move back, to go back to the hospital, just to stay, well, for the both of us to just stay away from Mara and her nephew, just until they leave the flat. But I was so unbelievably confused. I cannot begin to explain that scenario. You could honestly see and genuinely see that Mara and Cecilia's nephew never saw anyone standing in front of them. That was completely confusing to me. They were there looking for Cecilia. They did not see her, nor did they see me. I don't know how to explain that. And when I asked Cecilia why didn't they see us? We were right there. She reminded me about her invisibility ability. And in that moment, I could not argue it because of what I had just experienced. And we waited a while at the hospital just until Mara and Cecilia's nephew left. And then we went back to Cecilia's flat. And Cecilia spoke to her husband while I was there. She asked him what Mara wanted, and he said that she was looking for Cecilia. I heard it myself. Mara was looking for Cecilia, but Cecilia and I were standing only 5 meters away from where they were, and they had looked in our direction, quickly glanced over, as if nobody was there. For the life of me, I don't know how to explain that. But like all things with Cecilia, again I raise question marks. In all honesty, I cannot for the life of me explain that scenario away. I know what I witnessed firsthand. It still baffles me completely. There is no way I can explain it away. But I do have questions. Simple questions. If Cecilia could really turn herself invisible, then how did the police and the investigators manage to arrest her? She could have merely turned herself invisible and just watched them search for her in her own apartment. Just on that simple fact. Or even on her supposed claims for the occult trying to kill her, or her father trying to kill her. Why couldn't she turn herself invisible? Simple things like that. But more specifically, for being arrested, that's where I throw out the invisibility ability altogether, because even though I can't explain the scenario I witnessed, I still can't fully believe it, because she's in prison. She was arrested, she was sentenced, and for lifetimes. At any given moment in all this time frame, she could have turned herself invisible. But yet, she didn't. She couldn't. People could see her. Now, the eighth ability that I want to talk about is basically teleportation. In all honesty, I don't know all the extensive details about teleportation, except that you move from one place to the other extremely fast, and also from what I've seen in movies. Cecilia used a different word for it though, and for a long time I battled to remember the name, or the word that she constantly used. But as far as I recall, she referred to it as spotting, where she would be in her room one minute, disappear, and be somewhere completely different, no matter where it was. And it would happen within a split second. Now, I know this is a fake claim. I've never seen Cecilia do this at all. But she used spotting or teleportation more so when it came to being attacked. One minute she would be fine in her flat. Next minute, when whoever was in the room with her, when our backs were turned, apparently someone from the occult teleported or used the spotting method to appear in Cecilia's room, attack her within a split second, and then disappear again to where Cecilia is now lying on the floor and the usual drama would take place. When it came to teleportation or spotting, this was the more regular occurrence where others would be doing it to her. But Cecilia claimed to be able to do this herself, and apparently she had done this often. But I honestly and completely throw this claimed ability off as complete nonsense, because again, if Cecilia could teleport, how on earth was she arrested? How was she in jail? She could literally disappear from being in her cell to being out wandering the streets, or in another country for that matter. Or according to Cecilia, she could actually be on the moon. Um, that's how far she would even go with her exaggerations. So when it came to teleportation, it was a fairly common topic, but it was definitely a fake claim because, as far as I know, even with others in her group, no one has ever witnessed this. I've definitely not witnessed it. And whenever a teleportation event happened, everyone's backs were turned for the event. And again, like I said, she could have already escaped prison by now. So obviously, she can't teleport. Or basically, disappear and appear wherever she wants. Now, the ninth claimed ability Cecilia had was the ability to change her appearance. And I'm not talking about turning into a wolf or a werewolf. I'm talking about looking like someone else completely, or looking identical to someone else. Whoever she wanted, whatever she wanted, she could literally disguise herself. She described it as basically a haze or a mirage, basically, that would be placed over her and around her to look like whatever she wanted. So her body itself would not actually change. She would not grow taller, shorter, grow longer hair or shorter hair. It was basically her appearance in anyone else's eyes or everyone else's eyes would be completely different to what she actually genuinely looked like. There was a haze or a mirage, or I'm not even sure what to call it or what to refer to it as, but it was a supernatural ability or a veil basically placed over her to look like something she was not in physical appearance, in order to do whatever she wanted. Now, for me, this is a completely nonsense claim. I'd never seen Cecilia do this, and I highly doubt anyone in her group saw Cecilia do this as well. But the more common factor or the more common scenarios regarding this ability was when the occult was trying to attack her. And when it came to the times that I was with Cecilia, and by certain time points, I already knew what her father looked like, what certain people in her circle or in her life looked like. So I could already recognize them. But when Cecilia would claim that her father would be attacking her, or was attacking her, or was spying on her, or was following her, whenever myself or anyone else would turn around to look to see if Cecilia's father was there, the person looked completely different to Cecilia's father himself. And different each time. It wasn't this person never looked the same. And Cecilia would quickly then remind us of this ability to change your appearance. It was a disguise, so that no one else would know that Cecilia's father is genuinely following her, but she would recognize him because of basically being his biological child, the occult links and all the other similar types of explanations that she would give. She would be able to recognize him, and others in the occult would be able to recognize him. But any outsiders, basically those who were not in the occult, we would be completely fooled. And this same or similar scenario would happen for other people who were supposedly trying to kill Cecilia, people who were from the occult. They would always look different to us, but it was the person themselves. The person from the occult would always disguise themselves differently, so Cecilia would recognize them, but we would not. It is a very, very easy but also dumb way to fool someone, because for me, I never completely bought into this. It's just something I could not fathom. I'd never witnessed it myself. It's not something that I could see truth to. But at the same time, in each of those scenarios, when someone from the occult, including Cecilia's father, was trying to kill her or follow her, there was nothing dramatic that happened. So there was honestly no cause for alarm. It was just someone stalking her, basically. And she became paranoid. That was basically all that happened. So for me, I never saw reason into actually wholeheartedly even trying to grasp this concept of a complete foolproof disguise or mirage or veil or whatever you would like to call it, in order to pretend to look like someone else. So for this ability, I completely throw off as nonsense. Now, for the 10th claimed ability, walking on water. Everyone in Cecilia's group knew about this. None of us had ever, as far as I know, none of us had ever witnessed this firsthand. I never witnessed this firsthand. But again, like levitation, Cecilia used photos from the movie The Craft, where the photo was small, the photo was blurry, and the person in the photo was at a very far distance where you could only see a person dressed all in black walking on water. There was no way you could even try figure out what this person looked like. And Cecilia again explained that this was taken in her younger days. This is when she first learned to walk on water. Here's one photo of evidence of her doing it. This ability, or this claimed ability, was one of the first initial sets of claims that Cecilia had for what she could do when I met her, when any of us met her. None of us had seen the movie. The figure or the person in the photo was too blurry, too small for us to see. And adding up to everything we had been told, especially with our experiences, I don't know how many of us completely believed that Cecilia could walk on water, because one of us questioned if she could still do it. I could be wrong, but I think Ria asked if Cecilia would show us, that she could walk on water, because in all honesty, it would be highly fascinating to see someone do that. But Cecilia quickly justified and reasoned away that she lost that full ability when she left the occult. So, obviously, she couldn't give further evidence to it, and obviously it was a fake claim, yet another lie. And I know for myself personally, between the endless list of abilities and scenarios and claims that Cecilia had, there were so many columns in the mind map of my mind that I had drawn up for what was true, for what wasn't true, and for I honestly have no clue. Because there are things I had seen firsthand that were true. There were things that I had seen firsthand that were not true. Then there were things I could not explain away. And I still have those 3 columns in my mind. And I'm still waiting to get answers to those questions that I still question. Because to some degree, some of the abilities, some of the events, some of the scenarios and claims, they can be reasoned away. But then there's also no way you can reason them away. So they just have very big question marks hanging over them. But I think at the end of the day, and I'm speaking more so for myself here, whatever Cecilia claimed over her life, even when it came to her abilities, it didn't really matter to me whether it was true or not, because talk is cheap. It's easy just to claim to do something. And if it's not a life and death scenario, if it's not critical, then I honestly could not be bothered about whether it was true or not. It just didn't matter to me. If you want to claim that you can astral to the moon, well, go ahead and be happy in your delusion. But if it turns out to be something that's critical or something that could potentially kill you, then I pay more attention to it, and I pay a more extensive detail, or I try to find out to see how legitimate it really is, because then it's more critical. But even when it came to the critical scenarios, or the abilities that would fall into the critical scenarios, there are still question marks. I mean, even going back to the first occult claim for being a werewolf, why hasn't Cecilia completely transformed in prison yet? In all this time period, she would have completely destroyed every person in prison by now. Again, with teleportation, turning invisible, astraling, not being able to find someone. There's truth to a lot of the claimed abilities, but there's also a lot of non-truth to the abilities at the same time. It's a jumbled up mess of confusion at the end of the day. But at the end of it, with the confusion and question marks, but the things that I have witnessed personally, the things that I cannot and have honestly endlessly tried to explain away and overly try explain away continuously for years now, the only thing that is left in my mind, because I still don't have answers for things that I can't explain away, the only thing that's left in my mind is how much of what Cecilia said or claimed was true. How far into Satanism or into the occult was she actually involved in? Where is the line drawn? What part is true and what is not true? To what extent? My mind, I think, in all honesty, that is the main question. Basically, how deeply rooted or how deeply involved, or how deeply was she so desperate to want to be a Satanist, to have these claims and carry out these things. And I'm honestly hoping to get answers to questions that still hang in my mind on a lot of topics. But at the same time, I still have to come to the conclusion and accept that I more than likely will not get confirmation to even the crucial questions. Because with Cecilia Steyn, it's just a whirlwind of destruction. I mean, even she believes her lies. So, as for the rest, I guess for me, I'll probably never know answers to a lot of questions, and I'm just going to have to live with that. But at the same time, it does honestly scare me and worry me as to the things that I witnessed firsthand that I can't explain away. Because who really was this person that was supposedly my best friend for almost 4 years? Who was she really? That question scares me beyond belief.